Okie dokie. It's been a little while. Anybody remember what we were learning about? Colby. David's what? Yeah, the key moments in the life of David, or times. It's not necessarily like this minute, but key happenings or decisions that he made, things he learned in David's life. And we have, let me see here. Anybody remember any of the 5 that we've gone over so far? Colby? Yes, David is a shepherd boy, protecting his father's flock. We looked at some lessons that he would have learned there, the things that the Lord taught him. Colby? I think that was in one of the lessons. That was one of the points. He was obedient to his father and taking the food to his brothers. But remember any of the other key points, the key moments in David's life? Colby? Goliath. David slaying Goliath. Yes, that's a big one. It's what we all think of with David. Haley? Yes, anointed as the king of Israel. So that's 1, 2, and 3. Anybody remember others? The last 2? Colby? No, not yet. Elijah, you remember? Running from Saul? No. Yes, we talked about David's response to great victory, and after he defeated Goliath, how he handled that wisely and in a godly manner. And the last one, we had 2 or 3 weeks on the last one. Haley? Yes, the gathering and training of his mighty men and the stories that go along with that. That was an interesting lesson. So this week we're going to look at a topic that usually brings up some controversy, and hopefully we'll sort through some of that today. But David's twice refusal to lift up his hand against King Saul. So we'll be in 1 Samuel chapter 24. 1 Samuel 24. Let's go ahead and pray before we begin. Father, again, we ask for your wisdom as we look at your word. Please give us something, Lord, help us to be ever students of the Bible, and we're never to grow complacent in our Christian lives, but to grow and desire your word more and more, especially as this world gets darker. And please pray that today's happenings would be honoring to you. We would worship you from our hearts and our minds, and love you and pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, 1 Samuel 24. We'll read down through here a bit. It came to pass when Saul was returning from following the Philistines that it was told him, saying, Behold, David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi. Now, the wilderness of En-Gedi, you look up pictures of that, it's anything but a hospitable place. In fact, it describes it a little bit here. But it's rugged country. Not a nice... It's not even, sometimes you think of wilderness and you think desert. And even though that's the case in some instances, it's not just sand dunes, I mean, it's rugged cliffs and rocks and caves, but that's where he's at. Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel and went to seek David and his men upon the rocks of the wild goats. I mean, have you ever watched goats video or in person, goats on rocks, especially some of these cliffs? I mean, these ibex and mountain goats, it's unbelievable. I mean, they'll walk on cliffs that are like this, and they'll have this little narrow ledge to walk on. Rugged country. But that's what it says, the rocks of the wild goats. And he came to the sheepcotes, by the way. Sheepcotes are like sheepfolds, where was a cave, and Saul went in to cover his feet, and David and his men remained in the sides of the cave. So David and his men are in there. Saul goes in and unknowingly, or oblivious to the fact that David and his men are in there. And the men of David said unto him, Behold, the day of which the Lord said unto thee, Behold, I will deliver thine enemy into thine hand, that thou mayest do to him as it shall seem good unto thee. Then David arose and cut off the skirt of Saul's robe privily. And it came to pass afterward that David's heart smote him, because he had cut off Saul's skirt. And he said unto his men, The Lord forbid that I should do this thing unto my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch forth mine hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord. So David stayed his servants with these words, and suffered them not to rise against Saul. Saul rose up out of the cave and went on his way. David also arose afterward and went out of the cave and cried after Saul, saying, My lord the king! And when Saul looked behind him, David stooped with his face to the earth and bowed himself. I imagine Saul was pretty surprised when he heard a voice coming from behind him out of the cave. And David said to Saul, Wherefore hearest thou men's words, saying, Behold, David seeketh thy hurt? He's saying, why are you listening to these people, telling you that I want to hurt you? Behold, this day thine eyes have seen how that the Lord had delivered thee today into mine hand in the cave. And some bade me kill thee, but mine eyes spared thee. And I said, I will not put forth mine hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. Moreover, my father, see the skirt of thy robe in my hand. For in that I cut off the skirt of thy robe and killed thee not, know thou and see that there is neither evil nor transgression in mine hand, and I have not sinned against thee. Yet thou huntest my soul to take it. The Lord judge between me and thee, and the Lord avenge me of thee, but mine hand shall not be upon thee. As saith the proverb of the ancients, wickedness proceedeth from the wicked, but mine hand shall not be upon thee. After whom is the king of Israel come out? After whom dost thou pursue? After a dead dog, after a flea. So David's humbling himself before King Saul, which is pretty amazing considering that he knows he's in the right. David's not doing anything wrong to King Saul, not that he was perfect, but he's given Saul no reason to chase after him to try to kill him. And he's still, humbling himself before King Saul. He says, I'm nobody. Why are you chasing me? The Lord therefore be judge, and judge between me and thee, and see and plead my cause, and deliver me out of thine hand. And it came to pass, when David had made an end of speaking these words unto Saul, that Saul said, Is this thy voice, my son David? And Saul lifted up his voice and wept. So here, it's interesting. It sounds like King Saul doesn't even know exactly who he's talking to the whole time. Maybe David is still in the cave in the shadows. But Saul recognizes David's voice, and he lifts up his voice and weeps. And he said to David, Thou art more righteous than I, for thou hast rewarded me good, whereas I have rewarded thee evil. And thou hast showed this day how that thou hast dealt with me. This day, how that thou hast dealt with me. For as much as when the Lord had delivered me into thine hand, thou killest me not. For if a man find his enemy, will he let him go well away? Wherefore the Lord reward thee good, for that thou hast done unto me this day. And now, behold, I know well that thou shalt surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in thine hand. Swear now therefore unto me by the Lord, that thou wilt not cut off my seed after me, and that thou wilt not destroy my name out of my father's house. And David sware unto Saul, and Saul went home, but David and his men gat them up unto the hold. So here we have a story, one of two, of David sparing King Saul's life. We find the other example in chapter 26. And at that point, Saul, again, it's like, the guy confuses me. It's like so many times he repents of following David, and he realizes he's wrong, and he stops. And then it's like he can't help himself. He's driven to it again, and he chases after David again. And David knows this because, here Saul sounds like he repents. He sounds like, I'm so sorry, you're right, I'm wrong, I'm going to leave now. And instead of David saying, okay, we're all good, let me follow you back to back to town and, everything's fine and dandy. He says that he and his men get them up to the hold. He's like, yeah, this ain't over yet. And, but Saul, anyway, he seemingly repents here, but then 2 chapters later, he's chasing David again, and David sneaks down into his camp with Abishai, and they steal King Saul's spear and his container of water. What do they call that? In the bolster. Yeah, bolster. So they take his water canteen and his spear right from by his head. It had to be a little nerve-wracking. I'd like to see that. Him slipping down in there. Because, it's not just Saul. You've got his men. You've got Abner, the captain of his guard, and they're all sleeping. Somebody should have been watching the king, probably. But anyway, so David spares Saul's life a second time. And he recognized that even though he was to be the next king, it wasn't God's timing. And there's a principle here in these examples, in these stories of David, and we see it several times. David says, I'm not going to lift my hand against you. I'm not going to touch you. I don't agree with what you're doing. I don't know why you're chasing me. I've done nothing to cause you to kill me, but you're God's chosen man for this position, for this time, and it's not my job to step up and take your life. And it's a principle, okay? It's a principle that David lives by here. He didn't go by his feelings. He recognized God placed this man in charge. Is he perfect? No. But God hasn't told me to kill him. That's not my job. And so he lives by this. And so, again, we'll discuss a little bit later here. There's this principle is taken out of context. These stories of David are taken out of context and taught today in a wrong manner. We'll get to that in a bit. But I believe the principle here is that when God places people in positions, he does so for a reason. It doesn't catch him by surprise that Mr. Biden is in the presidency of the United States of America. God's not sitting in heaven looking down saying, oh, look at that guy. He cheated his way to the top. That was not my plan. It seems that, the election was rigged. We don't know 100%, but either way, it doesn't matter because Mr. Biden, imperfect being, we strongly disagree with so many of his decisions and the people running him. But God put him there. God allowed him to be in control. God allowed heathen nations to come in and judge the Israelites. God allows these things. And whether that's God's chosen people, the nation of Israel, whether it's God's chosen governmental leaders, whether it's God's chosen pastors, whether it's God's chosen parents for children, we need to understand that God's chosen are to be respected within their realm of authority. And I believe it's important to remember that within their realm of authority. We're not saying that David was to do everything that Saul said by any means, because I believe if Saul would have commanded David to do things that were against God's will, he would not have done them. In fact, we have an example of Saul's own servants ignoring his commands because they knew it was something that would displease God. And that was when Abiathar, there's so many A names in this story. I think it's Abiathar, right? Is it Abiathar? No. It's the priest. Abiathar was the son, or one of the sons. Ahimelech? Is it Ahimelech? Ahimelech, the priest, helps David, just gives him food and Goliath's sword. Of course, David lies to him, which wasn't right. But Ahimelech unknowingly helps David. Saul gets mad about it, wants the whole family wiped out, the whole family of priests. And he commands his servants to do it, and the servants said, no. I'm not touching those guys. Those are God's men. And so I'm not advocating that we just obey every single thing that is said to us or told us or commanded by certain authorities. But at the same time, we need to have a proper perspective of them. I know myself, I find myself, bad-mouthing the president so often, complaining about him, him, governmental leaders, whatever it is. That's really not. I mean, we're to state the truth. We're not to, lie about what's going on. But at the same time, the Lord put them there. And even if it's for a reason that we don't like judgment for the wickedness in America, judgment for complacency of Christians, whatever that reason is, God allowed him to be there, or, any type of leadership role God allows for some reason, and we need to be okay with that and not complain. But anyway, I'm getting a little off track here. But David lived by this principle. He was not going to hurt King Saul. He wasn't going to harm him because he realized that God had put him here. And it's a principle that is established by God. If we look at Psalm chapter 105, Psalm 105, we see a description here of Israel in the early years, back to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. Psalm 105, verse 14. How about verse, let's see here. Verse 11, saying, Unto thee will I give the land of Canaan, the lot of your inheritance, when they were but a few men in number, yea, very few, and strangers in it. So this is back to when Israel was starting, before really it was even a nation. Okay, there's just a few people in a strange land. You got Abraham in the land in the promised land, and then he leaves Egypt and he comes back, and you have Jacob and his sons who go down to Egypt. There's times when they're just a few in number. They're strangers in these lands. When they went from one nation to another, from one kingdom to another people, he suffered no man to do them wrong, yea, he reproved kings for their sake. We have the story of Abraham and Sarah in Egypt, and the Lord comes to the king of Egypt and warns him that you better not touch him. You better not do him harm. And of course, they shouldn't have been there, and probably, and Sarah, they lied about Abraham and Sarah. But beside the point, God protected them. God protected their marriage, and they were chosen people. Abraham was chosen of God. He made a covenant with him, saying, Touch not mine anointed, and do my prophets no harm. Moreover, he called for a famine upon the land. He brake the whole staff of bread. He sent a man before them, even Joseph, who was sold for a servant. So you have a description here of Israel, early Israel, if you even want to call it that, just the forefathers of the Israelite nation, and God chooses them. He is their anointed. And that's really what the word anointed means, is, chosen. And God says, I'm protecting you. You're my people. I'm going to reprove kings for your sakes. People aren't going to harm you. If God has chosen a person for a task, it's not my job to step in and interrupt that. And again, don't get me wrong here. We'll discuss pastors here in a little bit. But you have Abraham in Egypt, Joseph and the Israelites in Egypt, Pharaoh and the Exodus. I would say you could probably call the 10 plagues a reproof of a king for not obeying God's command. And so you have a description here, and God says, my chosen people, I'm going to take care of you. Don't touch my people. Don't touch my chosen ones. Don't touch my anointed. Okay. Psalm 28, verse 8, the Lord is their strength. He is the saving strength of his anointed. Psalm 84, 9, behold, O God, our shield, and look upon the face of thine anointed. God chooses people for different tasks, different leadership roles, different positions, and really you could expand. Anyway, I won't go there. Get off track. You have Daniel chapter 2, verse 21, one of our scripture memory passages. Let's turn over there. Daniel chapter 2, verse 21. Daniel recognized this, and he changeth the times and the seasons. He removeth kings and setteth up kings. Okay? God puts people in power. And those who think that they did it all by themselves are foolish. The wisest men, the best kings in Israel's history, the best leaders throughout the world were men who realized that they needed God. That God put them there and that they needed to walk with the Lord. We look back at our own country, and the greatest presidents were men who feared God. Even if they weren't saved, they had a fear of God. They had a somewhat of a proper perspective on who God was, and that there are morals to be lived by. But God puts people in power, even if we don't necessarily agree with them. God anoints men to lead. He places them there and empowers them. And God looks at rebellion as the sin of witchcraft. Again, this is another example of found in the story of David and Saul. Saul disobeys the Lord, and to rebel against God's plan, against God's design, is as the sin of witchcraft. You mean even if I'm being treated wrongfully? Don't like it, but God has a purpose. God has a plan. David's running. If anybody had a reason to kill somebody, I would think it would be David, because Saul repeatedly tried to take David's life. Okay, and yet David understood, it's not my place. It's not my place to kill King Saul here. Okay, so it's a principle that's established by God. The principle involves sowing and reaping. And it's interesting because I had never thought of this, but it would have been pretty foolish for David to sow these wicked actions in this way, because he should have been, and I think maybe sometimes it's crossed his mind, he's looking down the road. I'm supposed to be the king, I'm supposed to be the next king of Israel. If David would have turned against King Saul, taken his life, there's a Bible principle of sowing and reaping. David's the next king. Who would have been coming after him? Of course, there still was. But he wouldn't have done himself any favors by stepping in and taking Saul's life, as his men encouraged him to do. Okay, we have in 1 Kings 16 an example of disloyalty to a king. 1 Kings chapter 16. Oh, I didn't write down the verses here. Let's see. In the 20 and 6th year, verse 8, of Asa, king of Judah, began Elah, the son of Baasha, to reign over Israel in Tirzah 2 years. And his servant Zimri, captain of half his chariots, conspired against him, as he was in Tirzah, drinking himself drunk in the house of Arza, steward of his house in Tirzah. And Zimri went in and smote him and killed him in the 27th year of Asa, king of Judah, and reigned in his stead. Now he's got it made, right? Zimri is the captain of half the chariots of the king. He conspires against Elah, the king, and takes him over. He kills the men in his family. He's the king, right? Well, how'd the Lord deal with him? And it came to pass, when he began to reign, as soon as he sat on his throne, that he slew all the house of Baasha. He left him not one that pisseth against a wall, neither of his kinsfolks, nor of his friends. Thus did Zimri destroy all the house of Baasha, according to the word of the Lord, which he spake against Baasha by Jehu the prophet. Let's see here. Skip down. And the people, verse 16, and the people that were encamped heard say, Zimri hath conspired, and hath also slain the king. Wherefore all Israel made Omri, the captain of the host, king over Israel that day in the camp. And Omri went up from Gibbethon, and all Israel with him, and they besieged Tirsah. And it came to pass, when Zimri saw that the city was taken, that he went into the palace of the king's house, burnt the king's house over him with fire, and died. So he kills himself for his sins which he sinned in doing evil in the sight of the Lord, in walking in the way of Jeroboam, and in his sins which he did to make Israel to sin. Now the rest of the acts of Zimri and his treason that he wrought, are they not written in the books of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? We find that he reigned a whole 7 days. 7 days of power. That was worth it, right? No. This man turns against the king, and God deals with him. And just David understood this was not his position to step in and touch King Saul. And it would have been very foolish for him to do so on several levels, but just in the simple law of sowing and reaping. David's going to be the next king. It would have been stupid for him to sow the seeds of disloyalty. It would have been something that he would have lived with the rest of his life. To live by this principle of not touching the king, not hurting the king. He had to be willing to flee for his life. He had to be willing to suffer a loss of reputation. Saul is slandering David. Saul slandered his own son, Jonathan, when Jonathan defended David. I mean, he tried killing Jonathan. It's like, this guy is messed up. I mean, it's pretty amazing how far bitterness and hatred will drive a man, and we see this in King Saul. But David loses, probably some of his reputation to a certain degree, because the king of Israel is chasing him, making things up about him, exaggerating his actions. He lived as an outlaw, really. David lived as a cast out. I mean, he wasn't sleeping in bed every night. I mean, he's living in caves in the wilderness, on the rocks, on the cliffs. If he would have taken Saul's life, stepped out of God's will and said, well, I'm supposed to be the next king of Israel anyway. Just Saul's not living according to God's plan. If I kill King Saul, I could just sleep in the palace from now on instead of sleeping on these rocks and the hard ground. I can step into that position. I mean, God promised it anyway. There had to be temptation. Sometimes we think of David as this. It's like, wow, it's so amazing. How he had I guarantee he was tempted. He's a man, just like any of us. He could have justified this in 100 ways in his own mind. Self-defense. He's trying to kill me. I know that it was hard for David, but he lived by principle and not by feelings. He didn't let feelings and circumstances guide his life. Okay? I think we're going to stop here before any of the bells, because I'm not going to make it through the whole thing anyway. But just that David lived by principle, and it's an important lesson because we have several examples of this in the Bible. We have Daniel. He purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat. He knew there's a couple views on why he didn't eat the food. Whether the Jewish diet or maybe the meat was offered to idols. We don't know exactly, but he purposed in his heart. He knew God would not be happy with him eating that food. And he purposed in his heart. He didn't look around at the circumstances and say, well, everybody else is doing it, so the Lord will probably be more gracious. He lived by principle, not by feelings, not by circumstances. And we have to be the same way. We've got to look at the Bible and say, This is what God says. Doesn't matter which family member opposes me. Doesn't matter which church member disagrees. Doesn't matter if the President of the United States says differently. We've got to live by the principles of God's word, not by feelings, not by what friends say. I mean, David's men in the cave, they're encouraging him on two occasions, in the cave and in the camp. They're encouraging him to kill King Saul. And David had to basically stand alone and say, no, that's not right. This isn't God's plan. This isn't God's design. It's not my job to kill King Saul. You live by principle, not by feelings. So we'll keep looking at that more next week. Let's go ahead and pray, unless there's any questions or comments. Oh. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Mr. Peterson. Hmm. Right. 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 And that's a good thought, because later they do talk about stoning him after Ziklag is burned. His men are pretty frustrated with him, and they talk about stoning him. So if he would have sown that seed, it's like, I mean, the Bible principle is you reap what you sow. We don't know exactly how it might have played out, but it probably wouldn't have been a good thing. But yeah, that's good.
Through the pastor,
Right. Right. Which isn't even biblical. I mean, what they're quoting isn't even, it's not even the right wording.
And verse 5, sin of sin
Before
all also fear. But it says, if always you go accusation. But when you've got 2 or 3 witnesses, they help them. But it's good stuff.
Right.
Especially back in the 80s. A big old preachers that stop the world going.
Right. Right. And yeah, that's the controversy that we'll get into here a little bit, because there's people preach that like it's biblical, and honestly, even in this lesson, I kind of struggled to discern the author's view on it entirely. It's hard to tell from just notes, but yeah, that's we'll discuss that some more next week. But it is an unbiblical approach to pastors being confronted with sin. Verses taken out of context, or this story is, and applied to pastors too often. But we'll get into that next week. So, all right, let's pray.